Ele chegou até aí, né? Ele logo escreveu asking da Getúlio sabe?
So this is really, so it's hard. These are methodology students.
Eric? Shall we start?
Why don't you just walk through real quick and just tell us where we're starting? So, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And then we gave a couple of
So guys, thanks for coming. Today we have here Daniel. Daniel is a professor at the University of São Paulo, and he kindly agreed to come here today and speaks with us. He's working with some co-authors in Berkeley this week, right?
Yep.
And he was with me in the traffic yesterday, and we spent some hours together coming from Berkeley to here. So he has, I mean, he's gonna talk a little bit more about that, but he has a lab at University of São Paulo that he's doing a lot of field work in several different states in Brazil. So thank you so much for coming.
Okay, thanks a lot for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here. I think, well, Leo asked me to talk a little bit about our lab, so I'll just a very quick introduction, or not that quick, about one of our main research agendas, which is basically the social-emotional learning and its importance for both success in life and the learning itself, and how we introduced this agenda in Brazil, at which point we are right now. But talking a little bit about how we got there, basically I started studying economics of education in '99, and I consider myself, I think, the third generation, member of the third generation of economists that studied this subject. And basically, if we had to summarize how things developed in Brazil since the 80s, and how economists basically in Brazil became interested in economics of education, I think we share a common story. Basically, Brazil is a very unequal country, and we wanted to understand why this inequality was so big in Brazil. And then, quickly, in this first round of studies, led by Ricardo Paes Barros, and then a bunch of followers and other independent researchers, documented that in fact education was behind this huge inequality, but not only that. I mean, education was behind a bunch of other social problems in Brazil. And it's fair to say that between middle 80s and the end of 90s, it was a period of a very strong advocacy, and at the same time Brazil was facing the end of the dictatorship, new constitution, and expenditure per student and overall preoccupation with education increased a lot. It got a lot of attention. And in fact, we were able to really succeed in including students, especially the vulnerable ones, into the educational system. It was a period in which a third of the Brazilians that were out of education were attracted at least until they're 10 or 14 years old into the educational system. However, we weren't able to have the same achievement in terms of improving our qualitative results, such as results in PISA, and even to convert these extra years of education into, let's say, labor productivity or others. And then at the end of the 90s, I think at the same time that these first two generations of economists motivated us to study education, and this was one of the most hot topics in my cohort in terms of dissertation, research, and so on. There was a huge frustration at the end of the century because, I mean, first of all, it seemed to be the case that an extra dollar spent in education weren't converted really in qualitative results, but also the main solution that economists had at that time, which was basically invest a lot in accountability, policies like bonus, or in school management, didn't indeed had such a strong body of evidence demonstrating its success. And then I think more or less in this context that, I mean, we started doing this agenda. The agenda is motivated by this fact. So how to improve these qualitative results? Why this extra investment seems not to have the expected impact in these qualitative results? And we started thinking that first, if it were true that the main source of this problem was school management or other policies like the accountability ones, Brazil faces this strange thing that at the same time it's a very decentralized country in terms of educational decisions, pretty much like the US. Almost every city has its own educational program, innovative educational program. And by trial and error, I mean, lots of school management programs and bonus and this type of policies have been tried. We should see more cases of success. It seems to be the case that, I mean, of course, we're not investing some area that should be invested in order to make progress, but it should be probably out of the traditional scope of school. Something that, I mean, schools should be doing, but in our legislation or in our culture, they until now didn't. And then, I mean, I studied Jim Heckman, and he was very interested in collecting evidence that the social-emotional or non-cognitive development was very complementary with the learning process. And we thought that this could be one explanation. And since 2011, we have tried to introduce this agenda in Brazil to see if it's true that these processes are very complementary, and to which extent if schools were also accounted for this type of responsibility, we could have better results. So basically, this is the context. I brought here some interesting facts. Here's both the average schooling, the evolution of average schooling since the 80s. So basically, to illustrate where I have just said, and the enrollment in education. So basically, we achieved almost 100% of the the kids below 14 years old enrolled, and average schooling increased in sort of peak rate, at least until the end of the 90s. But number one, and in this recent period, we accelerated even more expenditure per student, but this, I mean, almost didn't change our results in this. Slightly maybe in science, but not very much. And more striking, if you take this increase in average years of education in these last 30 years, between 80 and 2010, we see that Brazil increased average education, but almost didn't change labor productivity. Whereas a bunch of other countries, similar to Brazil, developing countries, had a similar progress in this period, but they managed to really transform labor productivity. So something we are doing, I mean, that this investment is not transformed in.
So I see Chile out there, but if you had other South American or Latin American countries, they have a flattish curve. I'm just wondering if this is a Brazil problem or something more generic.
I think most of the countries displayed a slope similar to the rest of the world. Of course, the Asian countries have a better relation, but in South America, to my knowledge, only Uruguay seems to be also a little bit flatter than this stylized effect. But that's actually another point. And you don't have the data of all of these countries. Mm-hmm. And these are basically the explanations that people are pursuing right now. These two, I think, attracted most of the economists of my generation. We had invested in these two other alternative possibilities. I think in both cases, this brings this idea of complementarity between the social-emotional development and learning.
What period is this for?
Which one?
The one you looked at the previous.
Until 2010.
2000 and 2010.
No, no.
98.
98?
No, 1980, 2000.
Yes, 30 years.
The average stayed the same all this period?
Labor productivity.
Oh,
Yes, actually, we only have the two, the ending points here. It's not that we have plenty of data in between. This is borrowed from a study that someone else did. I think the word bank. Okay.
what was the growth rate?
Sorry?
Was
In
the
Brazil?
growth rate- What was the growth rate?
Until the 2000s, almost zero in terms of per capita GDP, right? But between 2000 and 2010, we had some growth. But basically, to show you where we are, I mean, we study a lot early childhood development and how interventions before 5 years old could have long-term consequences on learning, and how the social and emotional development is related to learning, and they reinforce each other. I'll talk a little bit more about our agenda in the third hypothesis raised here. So we start, as I said, from this evidence that lots of other disciplines have brought, but in economics, I think, in hacking had a role here. And this evidence shows at least three important pieces of evidence. Number one is these non-cognitive skills seem to be as important as cognitive skills to predict success in life. I'll bring some data that I think help to understand this evidence, but it's in different areas of knowledge we have seen this. Second, the benefits of education, the reasons why people that studied more have better achievement indicators. When you try to disentangle the mechanisms, it seems to be the case that these social-emotional channels are at least as important as the cognitive ones in explaining why more educated people have better indicators. And third, there is some more direct evidence that these social-emotional skills are actually malleable. They can be intentionally changed through educational interventions. I'll bring at the end of this presentation a study. It's an RCT that we are running in Brazil, and it's a social-emotional curriculum for high school. And we indeed find some interesting results. Historically, the human capital theorists thought at the beginning that human capital was something unidimensional, mostly associated with cognitive skills. Basically, there was a rationale that suggested that the labor market reward that you know how to do tasks. There is a way to learn how to do tasks, which is going to school and increasing your knowledge. Going to school is very similar to other types of investment. It's cumulative, it shares some other features with the accumulation of physical capital. So this was the old human capital theory that Becker and others developed. In the 80s, I think psychologists, neuroscientists, people from other areas showed more and more that other characteristics, not necessarily cognitive, predict actually success in life. There is, one of the studies that at least in economics, I think, had some important repercussion. It's Dr. Michel's marshmallow study. I don't know how familiar you are with this one, okay? But it's children that postponed.
There's marshmallows right over there.
Yeah.
Look, we're dinosaurs eating them.
Yeah, I thought about bringing that on the table.
And I think Dr. Michel is a professor here at Stanford.
It was, yeah. So the place where it happened was this little nursery that we have just off campus.
Yeah. But basically, this was a very sexy study, and I think showed that some other characteristics also predicted success in life. Heckman and co-authors have also documented that, at least in the labor market, these non-cognitive skills are strong predictors of wages, drug involvement, health, among others. In psychology, Oliver John from Berkeley and Kast and et al. Show also that crime is related to some of these psychological traits. And now, this is this controversial. I don't think we should have to this line here, but I think we have this debate. What's the real problem of not getting good results? Is this quality schools or quality of children? I mean, should we have invested more in other traits of the students that are needed for the process of learning?
One, like in Brazil, there's this ideological thinking in education that also you shouldn't teach for a professional path. Like when you teach, like the school should only be focusing on education. And like here, it's very clear that they're very open about like you want kids to go to school to get a good job.
Mhm.
And in Brazil, I think the education school is not very, they are not open about it. Like
Yes,
when
they
they're
are.
discussing the curriculum, maybe someone can correct me, but
I think
you shouldn't say that's to get a job. You don't go to school to get a
I
job.
don't think teachers are trained to get this idea, like the schools of education don't prepare them to prepare the children for the labor market. But this is in our constitution, this is in the curriculum, the CAA, for example, they bring this idea of preparing for the job. So it's kind of contradictory ideas that are reaching the schools. But we have this in the law actually. It is in the NDB, it is in the constitution, it is in the CAA.
Yeah, because I feel there's some, like, when you're working with the basic, that like you shouldn't be focused on like it's just to get a job, but it's like it's for the knowledge. So I don't know, and here it's very clear, like in the document, it's for the job, to get a good job. And you measure the quality of schools by the job the students get.
Yeah.
So,
I think you're completely right. I think that
Are you saying all of this because productivity didn't go up?
because of what?
Why are you going into all of this? Because productivity didn't go up? And what is sort of, would you do the same thing in Japan?
I think it's
Productivity didn't go up there either.
Yeah, but I think in Brazil, the data have just shown only suggests that this agenda could be even more important in Brazil. But I think it's trending. I mean, lots of countries are now investing in this social and emotional agenda. It's not only Brazil.
Yeah, but I mean, okay.
No.
They're investing in it? How are they investing in it?
In different ways. I think there, first of all, interventions that have been planned, and they are more and more becoming popular and spread all around, even in the States. So here, I think the Casel is one of the.
How are they investing? I mean, what is the actual action to improve socio-emotional skills?
Yeah, there are specific curricula for improving social and emotional skills. So this is one way. There is another type of agenda that embeds social emotional development into the pedagogy that is good for other subjects, not specifically social emotional skills. You have this positive, the SEL programs, the social emotional learning programs. So this is one piece. I mean, there are people developing programs and interventions, and somehow governments are adhering to these programs and making them part of the educational setup. In another front, I think there are institutional changes. So in Brazil, for instance, as she started to tell us, we have just released the national curriculum, and social and emotional development became a formal part of the attributions of the school. This is not exactly money, but in a sense, it's an investment of the society. We are saying that the schools are also responsible, not only the family, for the formation of the schools. So I think different countries have adopted different ways to incorporate this agenda into their policies. But yes, in terms of cash, there is some effort to disseminate these programs and to convince schools to go into it.
In order to raise productivity.
Oh, this is to be proved. I think the expectation
Is that the driver, you think?
at least to improve our results in PISA, for instance. I mean, there is a strong feeling that if you don't have a minimum of self-esteem, a minimum of curiosity, a minimum of attention, of focus, it's very hard to.
The one place where I think is a good example is the growth mindset, right? Like when I travel abroad now, I'm shocked at how just everybody drank that Kool-Aid and just absolutely believes it. And look, it might be true, but it's just like the Norwegian government is actually putting, a school that doesn't have a poster on growth mindset in every room of there. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is that's an example of a place, and there's the belief, right, that it will get students to engage more in STEM fields, which might lead to greater STEM. There's no evidence on the long run of that, right? But that's the belief, right? And so I don't know that it's as controversial as, I mean, the Lumen Foundation. Yeah, no, that's the question, is if there's any long run evidence.
I think if you move on like to that correlations or at least that results from Rio de Janeiro, it would be clear for them, like they kind of impact that some traits in social emotional skills.
But just to motivate the discussion, I think there are two main channels here to motivate the discussion. One is this interpersonal reason. So focus, self-esteem, this type of traits may reinforce learning, and actually it's a sort of simultaneous process because they are also fostered by learning itself. If you get good grades, your self-esteem becomes higher. There is also a spillover effect here, which I don't know if it makes sense in the US, but in Brazil it's a major problem, which is to develop respect, empathy, this type of characteristics in the schools.
Yes, welcome to the most empathetic country in the world, the United States. People are killing each other over issues. And I'm sure that the socio-emotional development we find in the United States is higher than in Brazil.
Yeah, but the way you externalize these traits would eventually be, I don't know if it's different or not. I've never entered in a high school classroom in the US, but in Brazil, it's often the case that the teacher spends more than a third of the period disciplinating the students.
Trying to organize
the class. And so on. There's very little respect, and often they fight explicitly with the teacher. And so on. Of course, it's less common in Brazil that someone enters with a gun. I understand this, but these are extreme events. But in the daily routine, I think there are huge very frequent episodes of lack of respect. Well, just to bring some, these are simple studies that I like, evidence that these social and emotional skills are at least as important as the cognitive ones in predicting success in life. Here is a meta-analysis about the predictive power of some traits measured at the end of high school on college GPA. And probably the intuition would suggest that the best predictors should be the SAT scores, right? Because not only both of them sort of measure cognitive skills, but also you have a clear motivation for the students to perform. So probably this really captures the maximum potential on these skills. But the evidence shows that, for instance, conscientiousness, which is one of the constructs we try to measure in our assessments, that basically conscientiousness is a domain of personality that contains perseverance, responsibility, attention, this type of traits. It's a predictor as strong as SAT in different studies with different samples of school GPA. In a different set of studies, Jim Heckman and co-authors try to understand why in the US labor force you could order, if you split the population into three groups, people that got the high school degree in the regular way, people that got a high school degree through this GED test that provides an equivalence of high school, and the dropouts. The evidence shows that the first group get the higher wages in the US, the second in between, and the dropouts get the lowest wages. The problem is that if you measure cognitive ability, the GED guys and the high school guys seem to have very similar results. And in empirical studies that try to decompose this difference, they find very little mediation of cognitive factors into this wage difference, this wage gap. But if you look at the non-cognitive skills, then you can see clearly that the GED guys are more similar to the dropout guys, and it does explain some wage gap. So basically showing that there is some indirect evidence in this case that this non-cognitive skills could be an important condition and determinant of wages in the US. Let me skip this one. In a more recent study using Swedish data, why this study is important? Because a critical problem here that we can discuss later is that measuring social emotional skills is something difficult. We still rely a lot in self-reports, including ours, are subject to response bias. And in Sweden, basically every male, when enlisted in the army, has to be interviewed by a professional psychologist that provides this form. Using this Swedish data, and in the model that the authors like most, they see that this index of cognitive skills predict wages more or less in the same magnitude as this non-cognitive skills. So again, providing some evidence that non-cognitive skills are at least as important as cognitive skills in predicting success in life. In the same study, with employability, then social emotional skills are much more important than cognitive skills. Talking a little bit about evidence that education can transform social emotional skills. This is a, well, sorry, this is in Portuguese, I mixed in what's here. This is based in a meta-analysis of Durlock, 2011, serving these only studies with high internal validity, so basically RCTs and quasi-experiments. And what the authors first show is that what they surveyed were only social and emotional interventions, okay? And they show that indeed social and emotional interventions have an important, on average, impact on social and emotional competencies. The average number they find is more or less a half standard deviation in this measures of social and emotional skills. But what they also show is that these social and emotional interventions have an important impact on this range on academic performance. They were not designed to improve academic performance, but they do. Probably because by changing social and emotional competences, they also influence the academic performance. Again, Jim Heckman, I think this study is now published in the American Economic Review. No, this is a working paper version from 2011. But studying the effects of the peri-preschool program, which is a preschool intervention. Are you familiar with the peri? Okay. What they do is to collect a bunch of results, all of them statistically significant. The peri-school is a randomized control trial, so treatments and controls were randomly separated at the beginning. The authors transform all of these impacts in a 100% bar, and the exercise consists in a mediation exercise. So this is basically a structural model, Heckman style, in which they try to isolate the fraction of these effects that were driven by changes in cognitive factors, changes in personal behavior, changes in social development. These two are typically classified as, let's say, non-cognitive skills. It's a misleading term, but let's use this interchangeably with social and emotional development program. What authors show is that for most of these results that capture different dimensions of success in life, the fraction that is mediated by changes in social and emotional skills is at least as important as the fraction mediated by changes in cognitive skills. So again, this is just to motivate this literature on social and emotional skills. In Brazil, motivated by this agenda and by this puzzle, another fact that I didn't bring here, we have a huge dropout rate, especially in high school. As I showed you, since the 2000s, the expenditure per student has raised at an accelerated rate. However, the dropout rate is almost stable since then. Yeah. And 1/3 of our adolescents do not complete high school, at least until they are 19 years old. So together this motivates why we thought that this agenda could be urgent for Brazil. And in 2011, we started to see how we could develop this agenda there. And since we were all empirical guys, and we had no, data sets, no systematic knowledge accumulated there, we thought that we should start by developing a large-scale assessment and collecting our own data to produce the first stylized effects and see if we could make progress in this agenda. With the support of the Sena Institute, we developed and we launched in 2013 the first version of our large-scale assessment. At that time, Sena also stood for social, emotional, or non-cognitive nationwide assessment, which was nice, but some psychologists don't like these terms, so we basically use still the name, but no longer the acronym. The way we did this at the first time wasn't, at that time I was still leading this group, and I think the way I thought about how to develop this instrument was a little bit different from what psychologists do. I wanted to avoid, first of all, this debate around the labels of the variables. I thought that whatever I could measure during high school that would both predict success in the future, I could have some evidence that if I change this, it's also associated with changes in these outcome variables. And I had some evidence that this change was due to some intentional educational intervention would be worth measuring during high school. So basically, I wanted to avoid this very tough debate in psychology around the labels. And basically, the criterion we built a protocol to classify all of the instruments that had both big samples and some evidence of correlation with outcomes, and developed the protocol to classify these instruments, existing instruments. And we found 10 instruments that got a high grade. It wasn't our intention to really build a new instrument. We wanted to have something to start documenting social and emotional development in Brazil. And we started doing this. But since we got 10 instruments, then the problem is we couldn't apply or recommend the educational managers to apply 10 instruments every year. Then we designed an exercise to take the best items of this 10, this especially in the predictive power of these items, and this was how we built this first questionnaire. It turns out that after we did that and run a factor analysis, surprisingly, these items grouped into 6 factors, 5 of them clearly interpretable as the big 5 factors of personality, psychology of personality. But the structure of the items were not built for personality. There were items of self-efficacy, items that capture beliefs, but they grouped into these 5 clusters that were clearly interpreted this way. Then, at the same time, this evidence and the fact that in our very first application, we already interviewed more than 20,000 students, we attracted the attention of some international psychologists. And after 2013, we started building a second version of this instrument, now intentionally organized around these big 5 factors. We can discuss for a while what they mean. But we didn't want to lose the predictive power and these items of self-efficacy and beliefs and mindsets that predicted really well education. So what we did was to build a new instrument that has 2 layers: a personality layer and a self-efficacy layer, captures beliefs. But all of them in the same structure, in this big 5. So, for instance, for extroversion, just to anticipate one of them, we would have items of the type: how much do you agree that you are a talkative person? At the self-efficacy level, how well can you speak in public? So basically try to capture how you are, what do you think you can do. This structure speaks a little bit more, especially the self-efficacy, with instruments that have been used by educational psychologists, and we thought that they would complete this personality layer. And also, a demand is a very explicit demand of the educators was to measure more than 5. This broad big 5 domains seems to be too broad to be useful in this way. So we also built this instrument in a hierarchical way so that we could have 18 facets that grouped into these big 5 domains. Are you familiar with the big 5 theory? Everybody?
Would you like to remind us?
Yes, the big 5 theory appeared in the 30s when people, of course, there was this excitement with the IQ developed the finding. I mean, in the beginning of the 20th century, psychologists were sort of getting familiar with factor analysis, and it was an important tool for them. And they wanted to understand better this evidence that if you apply a bunch of cognitive tests to a sample, the same person that gets a high grade in math also gets a high grade in science, a high grade in another topic. And so it seemed to be the case that a more parsimonious set of characteristics would explain this high correlation across test scores. And with the use of factor analysis, they indeed showed that a single factor could explain most of the variance of this test scores. This was the origin of the idea of IQ. This was called the factor G, and the IQ tests were basically a way to build tests that could, in a more concise and clear way, capture this factor G. And in the 30s, they thought they could do the same for the other traits of the individual. The individual is not purely cognitive scores, the behavior, they have other types of behavior. And the question is that true that a parsimonious set of factors could explain these other behaviors, yes or no? And the way they did it was to state this lexical hypothesis, which is basically, well, if there are other characteristics that belong to the individual, not to the context, and that could help to understand other behaviors, at some point they became an adjective. So with this hypothesis, they started collecting information on dictionaries. eliminated the synonyms, and they built these field inventories, asking people how big or how good or how high you were in each of these adjectives. And after running a factor analysis on these field inventories, they found systematically that 5 factors could explain most of these variance, and the same factor in different cultures in different periods in time. These factors would be named as openness to new experiences. This embeds curiosity, imagination, appreciation for the diversity, the taste for arts. Then conscientiousness, which comprises attention, perseverance, responsibility, this type of characteristics that are strong predictors of labor outcomes and school outcomes. Then extraversion. Extraversion is the first of the interpersonal domains. It captures your ability to involve other people into your life, into your problems. So it has energy, it has assertiveness, it has enthusiasm, a bit of leadership. And then it comes agreeableness or amity, which is the other interpersonal construct, because it captures your ability to voluntarily get involved in the others' lives. So it has trust in others, empathy, respect, altruism, this type of characteristics. And finally, it comes neuroticism, which is simply the reverse of emotional stability. It has depression, anxiety, whether you are a strong person or not. And why they use neuroticism instead of emotional stability? Because with neuroticism, these 5 letters form the word ocean, which is easy to remember. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So when you talked with psychologists, did you get any feel for the weakness of sort of this kind of grouping or this way of thinking of how to measure non-cognitive skills, social emotional skills? Because there's this history of psychology to say there's some kind of idea that I'm interested in, say conscientiousness, and I'm going to go and create a scale, and then I test it, and then I find a common factor between these questions that I ask, and then it's correlated with something that I think is interesting, and then I say, okay, now I have a scale for conscientiousness. And then all of these kind of also have the problem of social desirability bias. So when I'm answering the question on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, I sort of think, okay, I kind of know what I should answer. I should answer 5. And it's kind of hard to separate out whether people are answering for the purpose of the question or for some other reason. So did you kind of get a feel for those issues?
Yes, actually, most of what we are doing right now, there are 2 questions there. So question number 1, how our instrument relates to others. There is not only a huge body of investigation that trying to map these instruments. These are empirical maps. But what they show is that for most of the other taxonomies, you can have a good mapping with some facets that don't map exactly into only one of these constructs, but the match is quite good. So we can understand the empirical evidence of others using our taxonomy and vice versa. So, and this is a very interesting one, but just to mention, the grid scale correlates 0.90 with conscientiousness as an example. Carol Dweck's mindset correlate not that high, but with openness quite a bit. So magnitude is 0.5 or so. So we at least can have some flavor of what's going on in other empirical evidence. There is still a very strong debate, it's not a consensus, but if you see bibliometric indices, the use of this big 5 taxonomy has increased a lot in recent times. And they say not especially because of the interpretation that the big 5 theories gave to this evidence, but rather because of it organizes the evidence. So the first big 5 guys thought that the traits were set in stone. the same way that the first IQ guys thought the same thing. We now know that they are malleable. We're documenting the lifetime path of when it crystallizes. It's different for boys and girls and this type of things. But as an organizing feature, I think it has increased a lot in terms of penetration.
The second question?
The second question regarding the biases, that is true. But it's still, especially for public policy purposes, the most feasible way to do this. Because it's cheap, it's easy, you don't require too much training for the people that apply the test and so on. But it has. Most of our agenda now is to control for this response biases. The social desirability one is the most difficult traditionally. We try to control by writing items that are less sensitive to this according to some qualitative exercise. For others, we have statistical tricks that we can apply.
ETS has a test to measure these kinds of things, and they have some sort of forced response where they ask you 2 questions, like Big Five type of questions, and they're both equally desirable or equally undesirable, and you're supposed to sort of choose the one you associate with more. And they claim that it does a good job of getting rid of that kind of bias, but I still think even when they have that, the kind of part that I'm not sure of is just sort of the constructs that it's claiming to sort of measure. I totally am fine with the fact that they're correlated with all these things and they're capturing something important, but I still don't feel like I know what they are. Like I just feel they gave names to things. They have some evidence and some theory, but it's not looking at behavior. It's really looking at what I report about myself, which I find it's hard to get my mind around it. But I agree when you're trying to do this large scale, it's really hard to.
Fair comment, because I have my concerns as well. But I think, as I said, we are more worried to start an agenda and to establish some stylized effects than to have the final answer for everything.
Yeah,
but
just to let you know, you have 40 minutes. So.
Okay. So this is the structure of our instruments. It will help you to understand later the RCP. I'm trying to go fast now. For now. So basically, we have these facets within each of these Big Five domains. Here we have an extra one that I'll show you we only use for research, which is modesty. But we cannot, educators didn't like modesty, so we are not allowed to disseminate or to share the results for schools on these 18 facets. A summary of what we have found so far. Social emotional skills predict performance as much as family background. This is evidence number 1. So traditionally, since the Coleman report, family characteristics are strong predictors of performance. All of these are basically still associations. We'll talk more about causality later. We find that different disciplines are associated with different social emotional skills. In particular, the math scores are much more related to conscientiousness than everything else. But Portuguese is very much associated with openness. This is an interesting finding because it breaks a little bit this idea that people could be sorted in a single fashion. We have some evidence, I'll show you, that they can be changed. And we have documented that some contextual variables are very important to predict social emotional skills. So we have a study that associates violence in the neighborhood of the school with social emotional skills has very reasonable results. These are basically the graphs that we use to show what I have just said. This is the predictive power of different types of individual variables on test scores. As I said, environment here is basically family background. This is the predictive power of social emotional skills. Let me skip this. Here, as I said, we have different test scores. This is chemistry, math, history, geography, biology, physics, and Portuguese language. In this case, these are the two domains of personality that according to the literature and our own data, are mostly related to school performance. What we show is that different subjects are associated with different social emotional skills. So math and chemistry share or have a significant association with conscientiousness, whereas other disciplines are more influenced or associated with openness to new experiences. These are some of the findings in our agenda. Let me skip this. And we managed to have some influence in policy in Brazil. So we formed the group in 2015, the EduLab 21, and we participated a lot in the inclusion of the social emotional skills in the national curriculum. The inclusion of social emotional skills as one of the axes of development in the Council of Secretaries of Education. We created some groups for dissemination. We are now working in reforming high school in Sierra.
Could you talk a little bit of like how
it was established as one more goal for education. We elected which characteristics should be the ones that should be prioritized by schools. We do not have a curriculum in the sense that we have this comes first, this comes next. In Sierra, we do. This wasn't the purpose of the national curriculum. And that's it. I mean, basically, we were able to introduce in the text which social and emotional characteristics would be important, how schools could change them, and why. But I mean, this is not more than that. It's not like math and Portuguese that have goals for every grade. And so on. Yeah, but this is what I could do in an agenda that has 2 years, and I think it has a potential to be more detailed in the future. But at least it was explicitly there. Talking about our intervention now, again, I think this social and emotional agenda got a bit of attention in Brazil. Let me talk a little bit about the intervention we are studying, the study design, and then describe, tell you which results we have. Well, this is basically redundant with what we have just discussed. NTPPS stands for Núcleo of Work, Research and Social Practice. It's a curricular component for high school. It has, it's planned to last 3 years. It's a separate class. It's a social and emotional class. It's not embedded into other disciplines. It has it's a sort of strong intervention. Has 160 hours per year of personal and development and research. Just to give you an idea, this is basically the same duration of a regular math class during the day. So the school that accepts this intervention must be prepared to reserve at least as many time for this intervention as math and language.
But this was in the extra hour or like
The school was
the school day, like it was a full day school? Or
no. The school was free to choose, and that's a good point because even though we expected positive results in social emotional skills, results on learning are ambiguous because most of the schools reduced the loading of other courses in order to embrace this one.
So a school could reduce the time in math.
Yeah. And more than this, it's also ambiguous because you get a grade here, and the schools that adopted this intervention also have to agree that 15% of all of the other disciplines' grades is composed by this grade. So it has its own grade, but it also loads into the other disciplines' grades.
So it could be retained, and if I was didn't perform well in my personal stuff.
No, but if you fail in math, you can, and this grade is part of the math grade. Okay. I'll show you in the next slide how this curriculum works, but these methodologies emphasize student protagonism, interdisciplinarity. So basically, during the personal development dynamics, they try to bring contents from other disciplines, and these are sort of dynamics similar to psychodramas or to how it works. They bring some triggers. This trigger could be a music, could be a video, could be a poem. The students form small groups, pairs, and then they discuss about these things, and they go home and then they bring in the next class some text, some reflection on what they learned from that. Every year has a broader theme, and the students also have to go to their communities and do research based on that theme. This research is disseminated in a very what's the word for this? They make lots of noise. I mean, they present this research in the municipal parliament, in the municipal theater. They get lots of attention. So the research is not only disseminated or presented at the school level, but rather at the community level. The goal is to have an impact on the life of the community. So the research is an important part of this intervention. Research is the educational principle. I mean, they think students only know or learn about that after they really get their hands on the topic. And they also have a strong load of technology of information and communication. Basically, it helps to use technology features, internet, and other tools to do their research. The formative itinerary for this program, as I said, each year has a broad theme. In the first year, they prioritize the school and the family. So students are stimulated to reflect, what am I doing here? What's the role of my family in me being here? What a school means in my life? So why am I studying? In the second year, it's citizenship, basically. They try to develop this awareness, this social awareness. So I am part of a collectivity. I'm a citizen. How should I interact with society? And in the third year, it's the world of work. So, am I prepared to the world of work? What are the characteristics that are needed to stay in the job, to perform well in the job? This type of things. And they have a structured material to, twice a week have an hour and 40 minutes sessions to work with these topics. And again, in each year, you develop a bigger research project in your community related to these topics.
A couple of quick questions. Who created the curriculum? And, was there other content that was academic that was sort of interspersed with this? Like when you go do your research, you mentioned reading a poem, but was there, for example, heavy reading and sometimes science and other things, or was it really just a focus on?
Yeah, the
saying-
story, I mean, in Ceará, not only in Ceará, but probably Ceará is very much worried about education. They have a serious group of people preoccupied with education there. Is that in high school, you clearly observe this disengagement, this juvenile disengagement. The dropout rates are high. Interest of the students for the school is low. And this is, I mean, inserted in a broader debate in Brazil, the reform of the high school curriculum and organization. And they invited different institutions to participate in a contest. So the goal is to reform the curriculum in order to prioritize what they call integral education. They have some guidelines, but institutions, mainly NGOs, were free to propose their own things. It was sponsored by the Inter-American Bank. And then Instituto Aliança won this contest and was entitled to the right of implementing it. It started with 12 schools. Our study uses the first round of expansion to a little bit less than 80 schools. It's now 200 schools in Ceará, which is a half of the regular existing high schools.
Just in the public system.
Just in the public system. And it's universal already in the professional schools, which in Ceará, it's not small, it's an important chunk of the enrollment. Besides the curriculum, it's important to say that there is a very strong formative part with the teachers. So they first receive 4 sessions, full day sessions, to learn how to use the material. They simulate these practices in smaller groups. And people from the Aliança Institute, which is the NGO that won this contest, coaches the teacher during all of these years and still today. So this is a problem for scaling this intervention, but at least until 200 schools, they managed to do this. Okay?
So how many of these little units were politically broad content?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
Well, so like when I look at it, the health and sexuality unit would be quite contentious in the U.S. Essentially, I'm just wondering how many of these were things that you had to kind of roll out in a very sensitive manner.
Many of them, but after the design of the intervention, the Secretary of Education entered in adapting it for the contest they had. So then they dealt.
Feds bought in, and that really helped.
Yeah. So to talk about external validity of our exercise, Ceará has a little bit more than 600 schools with high school programs. We exclude from our target the native Indian schools, professional schools. Why? Because they already received intervention. They cannot be randomly assigned to anything. The 6 integral educations, because they are few and they are very different from the others, they had already displayed better results ex ante. And the land reform schools. These are very atypical. We didn't have control on how it works to use them in our research. So basically, our universe was about 500 schools. We didn't find the needed information to design the sample in 3 of them, and in a little bit more than 100, they have received an on-site intervention very related to this one. Indeed, the Aliança Institute had been in Ceará before with another intervention called Condomínio Digital and treated a bunch of schools. So basically, we had these 385 schools. Then we send invitations for them because, we wanted to maximize compliance, so we didn't want to have schools that would give up the treatment in the middle. 76 volunteered to this exercise, but 4 of them started doing the intervention before we could randomize. So we only had 72 to work with. These 72 were paired. We used this Mahalanobis metric to pair them, and within each pair, we randomly assigned one of them to be treated and the other one to be controlled. These are the variables we use it to med schools. The instruments we use it in the baseline, even though it's randomized, we did have a baseline.
Could you go back to that last slide just 1 second?
Sure.
I was just trying to understand how the weights are generated here. Like I'm just thinking about, because one of the things we sometimes talk about in other classes is how to do pair randomization. And I haven't used this method before, but it's basically generating the weights based on the variance.
Now, let's first suppose call this weighting matrix, weighting matrix. Suppose this is identity. If this is identity, this would be simply the Euclidean distance. And it gives equal weights to all of these covariates. What it does when you weight them by the inverse of the covariance matrix is to give more weight to the variables that supposedly are better measured. Okay? But you could play with other weighting matrices here. So when we run the baseline, Sena 2.0 wasn't still ready, so we had to use Sena 1.0 and the socioeconomic questionnaire. In the follow-up, and now we have the long-term follow-up, but I mean, in this study, we use the short-term follow-up after 1 year, so it's not the result of the full implementation of the intervention, but rather only the first year of this curriculum, okay? And we again had a socioeconomic questionnaire. We applied now Sena 2.0. The Inter-American Bank had this toolkit for direct assessment of social-emotional skills or hybrid skills among students. London Tower is an exercise of planning, can be considered a little bit more cognitive. Eye recognition task comes from the emotional intelligence literature. It's considered a task of empathy. And Simples is supposed to measure some aspects of creativity. And we also have Portuguese in there. In this exercise, we didn't use the toolkit because I mean, implementation wasn't really easy. It was we are still working in improving the quality of this data. The model we use for every outcome variable, of course, our interest is in the coefficient of the treatment dummy. Sometimes we control for students and school characteristics. It makes little difference in the final results. But as I will show you, even though the balance in the baseline is very good, we had a problem with attrition during this period. So we played with this thing here. And it's standard in this type of approach. We also include dummy variables for the pairs. So we had 36 pairs, but we include these dummy variables here. And we cluster the residuals by school. Some big numbers. Attrition, I mean, especially when the data collection is running in schools in Brazil, is really a problem, especially in high school. Absenteeism rates are huge there. So basically, already in the baseline, we had 15% of attrition, simply people that didn't show up. They were in our enrollment list, but they didn't show up for this the baseline collection, but fortunately, this attrition seemed to be similar in the treatment and control groups. We ended up with a sample of a little bit more than 4,000 students, half and half, roughly half and half split in the treatment and control groups. Our social and emotional skills in these two groups looked very similar in terms of distribution. The difference of means is never significant in these variables. If you look for Portuguese and math, the means are not different. These distributions, I mean, are somehow similar, but especially for math, one could say that it would display some ex-ante difference. If we look within pairs, for most of the pairs, so except for this range and here, for the very last one, almost all of the pairs, the mean difference between Portuguese and math are not statistically significant. We consider this a good balance. In socioeconomic variables as well, I mean, none of them are actually one of the characteristics related to labor market insertion of the mother were different, but I mean, the magnitude was very small. So basically, I think the balance test, no, this is already a different exercise. So basically, the balance seems to be good for us. Attrition was a problem. A third of the students interviewed in the baseline disappeared from our data set. Okay, in the end of the year. One of the reasons, I mean, abandonment rates throughout the year are high in Brazil, but also we are only able to collect data in the last week of the semester. And some students had already stopped attending classes in this. When you run this, well, later I can talk what these guys are doing here, but this is the cohort that is being treated. We also interviewed senior students in these schools, even though they were not treated. The purpose of this is a completely different one. And we wanted to see if observable variables would predict the attrition in our sample. The older students disappeared. These are the most vulnerable group attracted by the labor market, or I mean, most of them have already repeated grades and so on. Whether the mother is working is also another predictor. People that answered in the baseline that they like Portuguese are less likely to disappear, and the most extroverted guys also disappear. So basically, in terms of external validity, it seems to be the case that the remaining guys have some difference from our original sample. But more important than that, I mean, is to see whether this attrition process was different between treatments and controls. So ex ante, it seemed to be the case that the control group simulated the counterfactual world of the treatment group had they not received the intervention. But after the attrition, this may not be true. So what we did here was to only using baseline characteristics to see the group that was seen only in the baseline or both in the baseline and in the follow-up, to see how different they are. If they are different, we would attribute the difference in means as an effect of the treatment, but look, these characteristics were measured in the baseline. They couldn't be influenced by the treatment. But the difference between these two groups would have been, and some of them did. So as I said, basically, there are some differences between guys that are seen both in the baseline and follow-up and baseline only. And broadly speaking, if you look at these numbers, what we lost was the lower tail of the distribution, which is kind of intuitive.
I thought that the mean, maybe I missed this earlier, like, the actual rates though of attrition were pretty similar across treatment and control.
Now, what I showed you, actually both, but there are two attritions here. One is we have the enrollment list,
Yeah.
and due to absenteeism, people that
Okay, so
appeared
that's the
in the
first one,
baseline.
that was even in both.
Yes. The second is between people that appear in the baseline and people that appear in the follow-up.
But at the means, like just in the response rates on those two, I mean, what was the difference in treatment and control there?
There is no big difference in terms of the broad numbers. I should have brought it here. It's around 1/3 of the sample.
But I want to know the treatment control balance across it.
Yeah.
Was the attrition differential?
No, this was similar. In the range of,
Because the only reason I say this is that another thing that you can do with this paper also is, like right now, what the kind of general pattern, right, is if you find that the treatment and control group are treating at similar rates, you use that as saying, well, whatever unobserved characteristic leads to attrition is balanced across the two groups. And like there's an Ingress 97 paper that gets, like, gets cited in everything and saying, oh yeah, look, they're symmetric across the response rates. And what you have is actually, you can demonstrate that even though you have symmetry across the response rates, the composition of the two groups has changed differentially between the treatment and control group. And so, like, at the end of the day, you're going to write the paper you're going to write on socioactive, but you should also try to think a little bit about whether or not it's worth kind of trying to make the larger point that balanced attrition rates don't necessarily mean balance, maintaining the balance.
Okay.
I mean,
Because this is precisely what we're finding here. The size of the groups doesn't change much. I mean, they change with respect to.
But they change in a balanced way, or at least in a symmetric way, but not a balanced way.
Not a balanced way.
Yeah.
Exactly. This is what I showed you. And basically, in both cases, we lose the lower tail, but we lose more in the control group. So, in terms of the ex-ante characteristics, if you look only at the students that appeared in the follow-up, the control group became better than the treatment group. I mean, attrition is not good. Nobody likes it. But at least, perhaps we can interpret our results, if influenced by attrition, as a lower bound of the true effects. Why? Because, I mean, the control group results were inflated more than the treatment group results due to the attrition, the loss of the tail.
Just two things, like what are the standard deviation sort of differences so you can interpret that a little better? Like 11.61 sounds big. Is it quite big? And then the other thing what you just said is even if
50 is, I mean, these are IRT scores, but in the Brazilian scale, 50 should be interpreted as the standard deviation. This is 0.2 standard deviation.
And then the other thing with what you just said is even if your control group is better, it doesn't mean that they're going to grow better.
Sure.
Right. So.
Sure. I mean, I'm just saying that, I mean, if any, the control group results seem to be artificially inflated by the attrition as compared to the treatment group. What I'll show you again is the estimation of the previous model. Doesn't take it into account, but you can either, or you can interpret anyway. But I mean, we see this as either the point estimates of the impact or the lower bound of the estimates. That's our point here. Okay. So the first set of results is that we see significant impacts. Oh, I'm sorry, this is in Portuguese again. Engagement with the others is basically the politically correct name that we could find in Brazil for extroversion. So we find a significant impact in extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism there became emotional resilience. Cannot talk about that things. So the program had an impact in these interpersonal skills and emotional resilience, which is an intrapersonal skill. This is coherent with the curriculum of the first year also. So it seems that the program had a special intention to motivate students to reflect about themselves, to reflect about the role of the family, the school, and we do see an important impact in these dimensions here. The impact seems to be bigger in the vulnerable groups. In Brazil, the boys are more vulnerable than the girls in terms of dropout rates during high school, getting higher grades during high school, and the impact among them seems to be bigger than the impact among the girls. Girls only were positively affected in extroversion in this exercise.
But when you say appears, it means like the difference between these two groups are significant?
No, we only compare the treatments and control. So,
Okay.
I mean, that's a good. We see an even sharper difference when we compare students that had repeated grades with students that had not repeated grades. This is really the most vulnerable group in terms of dropout rates. Previous repetition is the strongest predictor of dropout. And now we see also an impact on conscientiousness, which in the politically correct version is self-management. Conscientiousness is a very hard name to memorize. Now, turning to the facets, remember, Senna has 18 facets. We also see a cool movement. First of all, this is a test of the quality of the instrument, because one thing that we would expect is that the facets that belong to the same domain would have a related movement if they suffer an external shock. And this is true, I mean, at the 10% level, all of the facets of emotional resilience, self-confidence, tolerance to the frustration, tolerance to stress, all of them had an impact. Some of them, sorry, this is not the significant level of significance, this is the magnitude of the impact. Here we see the colors capture the significance. 1% is the darkest, 5%, 1%. All of the facets of agreeableness, respect, modesty, empathy, and trust in the others, and all of the facets of extroversion, social interaction or sociability, enthusiasm, and assertiveness. Okay? And again, we see a stronger effect on the vulnerable. So if you look at the people that have repeated grades, we see some effect, some action going on in self-management, especially in persistence here. So basically, we interpret as an equality effect also on these students here. This is simply the summary of these findings, but we also look at impacts in math and Portuguese. Remember, we had ambiguous expectations ex ante. I didn't, unfortunately, bring here the average effect in these two groups, but it wasn't positively significant. If you look at boys and girls, students that had repeated grades or not, students with mothers with high education or low education, in most scenarios, these effects are not statistically significant, even though the point estimates are often positive. But for students that had repeated grades, the effect in both math and Portuguese was significant, even though the magnitude is relatively small, 10% of the standard deviation. So the problem seemed to have some extra effects on these guys here. And the final exercise we did is, let me see if I can explain this to you. Using only the control group subsample, we estimated a propensity score of the chance of appearing, still appearing in our sample, or sorry, in the enrollment list of the school in the next year. So we wanted to see whether the program kept the students in the same school. The students that were not seen at the same school can either have dropped out or simply change the schools. So it's basically the engagement with the school that we are measuring, not progression. So in the control group, we calculated these propensity scores, and we used these coefficients to produce the predicted engagements of the treatment group. And we compared with the actual engagement to see whether the program had a higher effect among the students that had a higher probability of not staying in the same school in the next year. And apparently, the program does have a bigger effect in people that are below the median or below the 50% of probability of staying in the same school. This is the very last exercise. I think that's it. Thank you very much. More questions? No? I think we could discuss in depth if you want the response bias because it's really a long discussion. Sorry.
And do you have any like intention to follow them up even farther? To see, you know, going to college, if it's really, you know, because you now have that socioeconomic. That's what he's doing.
No. What we did since then? In 2017, we collected the long-term follow-up because this intervention is supposed to last 3 years, and this cohort, if it didn't repeat grades, would have the full exposure in 2017. So in the end of 2017, we're still processing the data. We collected another follow-up, and with Leo, we wrote a grant, and we are still waiting for the answer to follow them in college or in the labor market next year. In the last year's follow-up, we included a bunch of questions that would help to track these students later on. I mean, it's a matter of money in this case.
Yeah,
we want to.
Because they are ITB, it's not funding. So
they are interested in that, but it's a different division. You know,
okay.
they have education and labor market. These two not always speak to each other. That's the.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Culture of clapping.
Yes, and even so.
That's interesting.
Did you like it?
Yeah.
We are now